located in it, nothing useful was found. The next handful of buildings I checked, which included an abandoned apothecary shop and a cobweb-infested shed, among other, more unclassified structures, were hardly more welcoming. I fancied I described the vague outline of a multi-armed, barely human body decaying beneath a sinister pile of dust, but I decided it could have been an illusion, for my imagination grew stranger as the shadows grew longer. The last dwelling I scoured was the largest in the settlement, full of rooms I could not discern the purpose of, as well as a few that were indubitably used for torturous purposes, judging by the dried bloodstains and spiked draconian contraptions. It was with great unease that I found a child's bedroom in that same house. Scattered across the floor were children's toys that, upon close inspection, were revealed to be abused beyond recognition by their owners. Wooden horses were dismembered, porcelain dolls divested of their eyes, all seemingly in sacrifice to a special doll who sat in a dark corner with supernumerary limbs attached to its body, black eyeballs peering out of the many artificial holes in its face. I knew at once that this doll was a vulgar effigy of the brooding star. Not at all accurate, but indicative of a desperate attempt on the part of its maker to please the star and be freed from its influence. This was inexplicably clear to me, just as a number of other unearthly things were when I awoke to this realm. Around the effigy's neck was a thin chain, and dangling from that chain was a skeleton key. It wasn't until I approached the dark corner cautiously and tore the key from its chain that I realized how repulsive a key could be. Its wickedly gnarled loops and twists seemed impossibly irreverent to the laws of geometry, causing a haunting paranoia to addle my brain, made worse by the countless eyes of that unnatural effigy staring psychotically at me from the darkness. Though everything about the key was unpleasant, I felt as though I would regret leaving it behind, so I slipped it into my pocket in hope that I needn't catch a glimpse of it ever again. As I turned around and headed for the door, my stride was quickened by a peculiar scuttling noise of unknown provenance. I was feeling vulnerable and claustrophobic from this nebulous atmosphere already, but that shuddersome sound sent me over the edge. I had to get out of there. And get out of there I did. Returning to the open air was not as comforting as you would expect, for there was an uncomfortable absence of fresh air. Specifically, there seemed to be no air at all, only a profound emptiness that refused to console me. By now, night had fallen entirely, along with my spirits. I couldn't decide which fate would be worse, being all alone in this unwelcoming world, or sharing it with the unwholesome beings of the scuttling, many-limbed sort my imagination hinted at. Another dichotomy of fates presented itself to me. Madness or sanity, which would be more preferable? To be at the mercy of real horrors and keep my head, or face illusionary ones and lose it? Unfortunately, I would have no say in the matter, and thus the pondering proved pointless. Wandering aimlessly across the center square of the hamlet, I was bedeviled by fate, indecipherable voices. I was on the verge of mistaking them for the wind, that is, until I remembered that there was no wind. I put my ear to the ground many times in many places, hoping to locate the source of these voices, to no avail. Eventually, I noticed the voices grew more hasty and demonic each time I walked past the central well, and so I approached it. It was obvious to me that this well was the source of the whispers. I put my hands on its somewhat slimy stone rim and peered down it as I did when I first passed through the gates of the ghost town, this time with more intention. I once again saw only blackness, and I smelled metallic vapors reminiscent of blood wafting up from the depths. That was when I heard it. The well whispered. Could it be? I wondered. Could it be my son, trapped in the depths of this wretched place? Or could it be the delusional oracle who ought to be dead? How is this happening? How is this happening? Son! I shouted into the well. There was no comprehensible response, only disembodied whispers growing more impatient. The deathly vapors began to affect me in strange ways, making me feel dizzy and listless. A sudden weakness overtook me and forced me to use the well's rim for support. To my panic, this weakness grew worse until, after a minute or so, I was all but paralyzed and entirely deprived of balance, leaving me at the mercy of gravity, who was not merciful, and saw to it that I slid helplessly into the well's gaping maw. There was a splash and a number of crunching sensations as I collided with the floor. Indeed, it felt as though I had broken every bone in my body. I opened my eyes to the pool of water I lay prostrated, which was quite shallow, yet dark as the river Styx was said to be. I lifted my head up, despite the pain of doing so, and made a feeble attempt at surveying my surroundings. The optical sense aside, I already knew I was in some kind of dank chamber by the reverberation and humidity alone. It was with sight that I discerned the rest of the nature of said chamber, and its nature was loathsome beyond words. Cages environed me like the cells of a panopticon, to which I was the central eye. Creatures of indescribable repugnance convulsed impatiently in these cages, teeth gnashing, limbs shaking, their rotted larynxes giving vent to insane desires now that they sensed vulnerable prey in their midst. Horrid, torturing wails, I knew, would never end until I released these blasphemous horrors from their squalid enclosures to do with me what they would. I recognized at once the holes in the cage's locks, and my hand all but drew itself to a twisted key in my pocket, that I might subject myself willingly to the lesser of two ghastly evils. This reality bears all the hallmarks of a great and terrible thought occurring in a great and terrible machine, the biological machine that is the brooding star. But what is the reality I previously inhabited? Was it merely another thought in another machine? No matter. Philosophy will not save me, for I have been hexed with upwards of 1,000 curses, one of them increasing the potency of my memory 100-fold. I would have considered that a boon in my previous life, but here and now it causes me great agony. Every 7 years I am forced by these things, my savage masters, to relive the horrors of my past, to novelize my trauma, that their pursuits of torture and torment may be immortalized and regarded with favor by the brooding star. All of my trials, the tainted apple, the harrowing effigy, the noxious well, and the others I have written of elsewhere, all of it was by design, formulated by the underlings of a veritable interstellar god. I reside on my knees in a room furnished with a stone altar upon which stacks of gray, sickly vellum, a vitreous inkwell, and a raven quill rest. There are innumerable shelves surrounding me on all sides, shelves upon which the works of my misfortunes lie by the score. My painful memories become more lucid with every pen stroke, made worse by the inevitable fact that my future will be just as dreadful or worse than the days before me. Dread specters patrol the halls tirelessly. Even now, there must be one leering at me from the shadows. I know it. The curses prevent me from falling into a comfortable insanity as the beings about me have, leaving me gazing longingly over the edge of dementia. Every second of every moment, silently begging for oblivion. Give me all of your rainy days, O ancient ones, and I'll give you all of my demon-haunted nights.
Noch so einer und die sind fertig. Wirkungstreffer.
August 1st, 2015, 9 a.m. It's been exactly 1 year since Jim left. That means it's been 1 year and 1 day since I was fired. I haven't worked since. I used to like the idea of being on disability, free money, and all the time in the world to spend with her. I guess that she didn't think of it that way. She was always ambitious. I guess I shouldn't say was. Every day I see Facebook updates detailing her constant successes. The most recent one was her engagement. I'd never seen her look so happy. I guess I knew things with us were going downhill when I looked forward to our fights. She'd always say something about how I'm so smart, that I was smarter than she, in fact, but that I had no ambition. It felt so good to hear that someone as brilliant as Jen thought I was smart, even though she yelled at me in frustration. She claimed she understood my depression and my anxiety and how they were terrible roadblocks on the path to my happiness. I thought that meant she could empathize and still wanted to be with me anyway. Apparently I was wrong. Getting disability benefits for my depression wasn't too hard. The money isn't great, but it pays the rent and keeps me fed. The only pain is that I have to go to therapy every week. I also need to go to monthly appointments to pick up prescriptions to help combat my depression, ADHD, anxiety. It's also procedural and detached from anything resembling real care. So, I'm a lonely, unemployed loser who apparently has this great mind that's utterly useless. But I won't stay like this forever. I've discovered something new. Well, something old, actually. Today begins my new life. The medication never worked, and the therapy never worked, the behavior changes never worked. Medicine failed me. Or maybe I failed medicine. Either way, I'm taking control of myself again. I'm not going to be a victim of the barriers my body put up for me. No more attention problems, no more depression, no more anxiety. For the first time in what may be decades, I'm filled with hope. August 1st, 2015, 3 p.m. All of my tools are cleaned and ready. In about an hour, I'll start. I need to keep a pretty comprehensive journal of all the procedures to make sure I'm not harming myself. I figure a running account of my experiences will give evidence of the positive or negative changes in both my mood and cognitive abilities. August 1st, 4:05 p.m. After I traced a dime-sized circle on the upper right part of my forehead, I used an X-Acto knife to carve through the skin. I wasn't prepared for how much this was going to hurt. I stopped a couple of times to wipe away the tears so that I could see well enough to continue. The skin lifted off from the bone without too much trouble once I'd finished cutting, and I flushed it down the toilet. Now I'm waiting for the bleeding to stop. It seems to be slowing already. It's so weird to see my skull exposed like this. I'm going to write a sentence or two before and after each of the next steps so that I can get as good of a description as possible, if this all works as well as I'm hoping. I opted to use a tiny drill bit over a single large one. A ring of tiny holes is going to take a hell of a lot longer, but I think the need for precision dwarfs time consumption in this case. I'm about to do the first hole. The first hole is done. Imagine the feeling of biting down on a fist-sized piece of tinfoil as hard as you possibly can, while your head hums like it's filled with buzzing hornets. The vibration was so excruciating that I'm only now feeling the pain of the drill site itself. I'm going to do the next 10 or so holes now before I lose my nerve. The vibrations became less intense with each hole. The bone pain got much worse, though. I'd never had migraines, but I assume they must feel something like this. I'm shining a light at the ring of tiny pores and doing my best to inspect what's behind them in the mirror. It's not very useful. The remaining structural elements between the holes are very thin and brittle looking. I'm going to cut them away with the wire cutters. I just dropped a circle of my skull into the sink. Now I'm looking at the bright red membrane that's covering my brain. I'm a little surprised by how many blood vessels are in there. I'm going to put out a couple more towels. Cutting away at the membrane is the part I'm most scared of. It's done. The hole is bleeding a lot. I'm taking extra care to not put too much pressure on the organ itself when I'm working to soak up the blood. I'm feeling a little dizzy, so while I hold the towel to the hole, I'm sitting and eating a piece of steak and drinking the orange juice I'd put out just in case this happened. The wound is slowly starting to clot while I wait here. The whole area hurts, but the pain is second to the strong pulsing sensation around the hole. It's almost like I have a second heart beating there. The blood stopped pouring out, and I'm cleaning the area with water and rubbing alcohol. And now I can see my brain. It's gray. It doesn't look like it even belongs to me. I don't know why it all feels so surreal. It's almost like I'm watching all of this happen to someone else. On the plus side, I'm not dizzy anymore, but I'm exhausted. I'm going to bandage everything and go to bed. I'll clean up tomorrow. August 2nd, 6:30 a.m. I woke up this morning with more energy and drive than I've ever felt. Even sitting here recording this feels like a joy. I'm not struggling to find words. I'm not dreading how I'll re-listen to what I've recorded and think it's stupid and pointless. Everything just works. The accounts I've read about people who share their experiences with trepanation made similar claims, but even as I drilled the holes, I never allowed myself to truly believe it would work for me. Even now, I'm worried it's all just a placebo effect. The pulsating feeling is real, though, and it's as strong as ever. That was something else my fellow Trepand mentioned. They said it was because the body was letting the brain grow again, something the skull had prevented after it hardened following infancy. I don't know if I buy the explanation, but I can't deny what's happening here. August 2nd, 2 p.m. My day has been spent cleaning the apartment. Over the last year, I'd let things pile up and grow increasingly filthy as my depression festered. Today, it's like a veil has been lifted and the light is pouring over everything I lay my eyes on. The place needed to be cleaned, so I just set to work and cleaned it. It looks better now than it did when Jen and I moved in. The therapist recommended that I clean quite a while ago, suggesting that a nice, open area would really help me see my home as a place for potential rather than stagnation. Now I know what he meant. This is what potential feels like. The hole in my head still hurts and looks terrible, but I expected as much. If I go out, I can wear a hat and no one would notice anything amiss. I'm not ready to do that, though. I'm mildly concerned about how badly the site is beginning to itch as it heals. I'm being extremely assiduous in cleaning and caring for the wound as it heals, but I guess part of that process is the damn itch. I'm doing my best not to think about it. August 2nd, 11:30 p.m. The first full day of my experiment is about to end. I'm about to go to sleep, and I feel like I've accomplished a lot today. My home is spotless, and I've finished a short story I've been working on for the last couple of months. I've gotten up to date with my internet and utility bills, and I even did a couple of sets of push-ups. I had to remind myself to eat, though. For whatever reason, I wasn't hungry at all until I realized it was nearly 9 p.m. and I hadn't eaten all day. I'm chalking it all up to my excitement. It's been hard to contain, but now I'm all showered and pajamaed and ready to end my day. I can't wait for tomorrow. August 3rd, 5:45 a.m. I was up before my alarm this morning to watch the sunrise from the roof of the apartment. Last night, I slept like a log and didn't wake up once. I noticed some blood on my pillow and under my fingernails, though, and I think I may have scratched underneath the bandage while I slept. I made a beeline to the bathroom to inspect the hole, and thankfully, I didn't seem to do any damage. Everything appears to be healing well. August 3rd, 1:15 p.m. I don't know if it's endorphins wearing off or just an artifact of my depression, but my euphoric feeling has diminished quite a bit since this morning. I'm thinking it might be both. Maybe I need to have a good meal. There should be something in the fridge. August 3rd, 9 p.m. Whatever I felt this morning doesn't seem to have been a fluke. While my mood elevated for a little while after lunch, I was back near baseline for the rest of the day and evening. The pulsing in the holes waxed and waned with my mood. Interestingly enough, when I'm happy and ambitious, it pulses a lot. When I'm depressed, it may pulse once every 10 seconds. It may have something to do with my blood pressure, so I'll keep an eye on that. Before bed, I'll do some jumping jacks and see if the pulsing returns. I'm fairly certain a higher pulse rate correlates with a better mindset. Okay, I just did the exercise. The pulsing is the same. My heartbeat is up, but my mood is still low. I'm going to bed. August 4th, 11 a.m. I just woke up. I feel terrible. I was scratching the hole again. The pillow is soaked with blood and there are remnants of scabs under my fingernails. Tonight, I'll wear gloves. That aside, my mood is still right near where it was before I started this process. I'm worried the surface area of my brain that's exposed isn't large enough to allow long-lasting effects. I don't trust myself to widen the hole that's already there, but I'm prepared to do another one an inch or so away. August 4th, 12:30 p.m. There was a problem with the second hole. I did everything just like the last time, but on the last tiny borehole, a crack formed in the skull between the original hole and the new site. I had to peel back the skin I'd left to make sure, but it was definitely there. I was forced to decide whether or not I should leave the broken piece, and I opted against it. Now I have an oval that's about 3 inches long and 1 inch wide. Removing the membrane from this part was difficult, and I had a minor issue with the blade slipping deeper than I wanted. Thankfully, the brain has no pain receptors. It couldn't have gone more than a ½ inch inside. Nothing weird happened to my body, so I lucked out and hit the part of the 90% they say we don't use. I know people are saying that's a myth, but with what's just happened to me, there must be some truth to it. August 5th, 8 a.m. No scratching overnight. The pulsing is there, but it's nowhere near as strong as it was the first time. My mood is still low. I have to be honest with myself here. I feel like a failure. This whole experiment is another example of me setting out to do something with good intentions and having it all blow up in my face. But I'm not going to be defeated by it. In the past, I would have stopped. Jen would have started a fight with me, and I just added to the never-ending cascade of fuck-ups that form my identity. Not this time, though. The increase in my ambition from this treatment must still be going strong, because I'm determined to see it all through. August 5th, 8 p.m. There are 4 more holes in my head. I didn't think I'd be able to do it. Towards the end of the last one, I almost passed out. I'm glad I had the foresight to keep a few sugar packets nearby so I could regain strength to finish up. Besides the issue of my dizziness, these 4 went better than the prior 2. I used the left and right side of my head this time, right above my ears. The skull was far thinner than on my forehead, so the vibration of the drill wasn't as excruciating. The blood loss was significantly greater though, which explains the desire to pass out. I have hand towels wrapped around my head so I won't get blood all over the place. Lucky for me, I'm a pretty quick clotter. That's a funny word. Clotter. August 6th, 6:10 a.m. I slept sitting up and woke up to major pulsing, not just in the new holes, but in the old ones as well. A small problem's developed with the second hole, though. I think it might be getting infected. The itching is unbearable, and I think it's starting to smell. I poured rubbing alcohol on all the sides and pressed it in with clean towels, so hopefully that'll stop whatever's breeding in there. My mood was pretty high. Still not as good as the first day, but much better than the days after. I have been thinking a lot about Jen. I've been thinking about Jen a lot. We had so many things in common. We loved talking about animals, and used to go off on tangents where we discussed all of the exotic ones we'd have when we were rich. Her favorite ones were rhinos. Mine were hippos. I used to tell her about the lake we'd have in our backyard where my pygmy hippo would play with her baby rhino. After they'd gotten tired out, we'd invite them up to the patio, where they'd curl up next to one another while we gazed adoringly at them and at each other. I wonder how she'd feel knowing I've been doing all this work to better myself. She'd probably tell me to do more. August 7th, 12:35 p.m. I did more. All day yesterday I drilled and cut and pulled and peeled. I feel like I can take on the world. It's almost like that one time I did cocaine in college, but the effect has lasted far longer. I'll update again today if I have to, but for now, I'm going to work on some of my stories. August 9th, 9 a.m. Where have I been? Writing. Since the other day, I've gotten down 100 pages of a story that I never even knew I had in me. Reading it over is like I'm looking at the work of someone else, someone far better, a stranger, I guess. On a slightly less pleasant note, there's definitely an infection in a few holes. One of them is weeping a gray liquid that smells terrible, and all of them itch. When I rub them with the towel to try to scratch, they break open and start either bleeding or leaking clear fluid. I figured it's like a cold that has to run its course, but I'll be damned if it isn't becoming a problem nearly as bad as the depression was. August 10th, 7:40 a.m. I scratched in my sleep. I don't know what else to say other than it was bad. It's hard to tell from what I see in the mirror, but I might have damaged some of my brain in the holes on my forehead on the left side. A small piece is hanging by a thread that looks like a tiny blood vessel. I tried to tuck it back under the lid of my skull, but I had to press pretty hard to do it, and I'm worried I messed it up even worse. At least I saw a bear today. August 15th, 4:15 p.m. More holes for me. Shaved my head, no more hair, lots more holes. Remember those wiffle balls from when we were kids? One day I'll tell Jen how I thought my head looked like a wiffle ball. She always liked baseball and playing with my hair. My head infection was getting real bad before the bear came. Now he licks my head while I sleep and keeps the gross stuff out. Jen loves bears and rhinos. Every morning I have to clean under my fingernails a lot. Petting the bear gets them real dirty. It's nice the bear shaved when I did, so I didn't have to feel like the odd man out. Those pulses in my head are nice and strong all of the time. It feels good. The bear licks me a lot when I sleep. August 16th, 2015, 5000. Scratch the bear by its ear, and he licks lots and lots. Lots of licks means a lot less itching. Jen would scratch my back when it was itchy. One time she saw me trying to scratch between my shoulders using the door frame. She called me a bear, because that's what bears do when their back itches. 60 holes. Going to cut out the space in between. Make my bear proud, if Jen can't be.
Sorry to ramble. It's just that I'm, what's the word for it? Detached. Strange feeling.
Seen it enough times in the field. Sort of figured if I ever was going to experience it myself, then I've experienced it by now. Hell of a thing. I feel like I'm floating outside of my body. Just cut the cord and I'd float away. Did you see the crime scene? Don't look at the pictures. Don't even touch the file. You'll thank me. I can't get my knees to stop rattling. Is that why I'm holding on to coffee like that? I'm shaking the table, aren't I? Hold on a second. Let me back up my chair. There. That's better. We've got to go official now. Can you confirm for the record that you're waiving your right to an attorney? Nah, I'm still not interested in an attorney. I mean, yes, I'm waiving my rights. Sorry. And I'm as sound of mind as I'll ever be. Are you sure? Yes. Let the record show that Detective Hobson Millgate, retired, has waived his right to an attorney. I won't need a lawyer after the DA stops puking and considers taking it public. They're not showing that to a jury. Are you ready to begin? No. But I'll talk anyway. What led you to the crime scene on the night in question? Would you believe I was planning a fishing trip before this started? Never mind. Hold on, I'm thinking. It's hard to organize it. Never been on this side of the interrogation table before. I guess it started with the reporter, name of, Bamer. She contacted me a week ago by email and claimed that she had some new information on the Driscoll murders. I was the lead investigator. The case had gone unsolved for 20 years, as cold as ice. Frankly, I thought it was bullshit at first. You know how that can be. Most of the time, it's not even on purpose. Everyone thinks they know something that will crack a case wide open. Theories are easy when you don't have to check them against evidence. The Driscoll murders were a big story around these parts. Lots of interest, lots of press. Over the years, I must have gotten a couple hundred shit theories. When I retired, I handed the investigation over to Detective Carroll, but I didn't want him to be bothered. I know he's busy with the recent gang activity. I figured I'd check it out as a courtesy. I wasn't expecting it to go anywhere. I met her for lunch at the Purrier's Cafe. Good-looking blonde gal, professional. She didn't fit the typical profile of a hoaxer or conspiracy theorist. Not that I put too much faith in profiles. She also might have been one of those creepy gals that gets off on death. God knows I've dealt with those too. I still thought she might be pulling my leg, or maybe she had been fooled too, but she had a file with her. It looked legit. It contained what appeared to be a confession by the Driscoll. Well, he wasn't a murderer, was he? I really do wish he had been, you know? It would have been so much better for everyone. Can you please fill us in on the relevant details of the Driscoll case? It would have been 20 years ago now. Thinking of all those years, I mean, God, 20 goddamn years. That's a long time to be... Take your time, Hob. Thanks. The Driscolls were a family of 6 in the suburbs, upper middle class. The father was an attorney, mother ran her own business selling pottery out of the house. 4 children, all high school age and below. Good kids, on a roll, no criminal record to speak of. The oldest son was caught smoking dope at his high school once, but nothing much besides that. Just the typical stuff you find when you look at people too closely. They disappeared on October 13th, 1994. No trace was found of the bodies. The mystery, and seeing as how it was right around Halloween, is probably why the press went so crazy. You still see it show up on some of those unsolved mystery shows. A whole family disappeared and no one saw a thing. No one knew where they went. A neighbor logged a sound complaint, which is how we got involved. There was an alarm going off and they figured it might be an intruder or something. We dispatched a vehicle. When no one answered the door, the patrolman went in to investigate. There were obvious signs of a struggle in the youngest daughter's bedroom. The bed had been flipped over and the sheets were torn. The alarm was a carbon monoxide detector. We found elevated concentrations of carbon monoxide in the fabric of all the bed sheets except for the youngest daughter's. We wouldn't have known to look without the alarm. The neighbor indicated the alarm had been sounding for over a day, and he'd been unable to get anyone to answer the door during that time. We also found several aluminum canisters and some hoses in a dumpster a few blocks away. At the time, we assumed the Driscolls had been gassed and disposed of at a different location, excepting, of course, the daughter, who woke up at the end and put up a struggle. The investigation gave no leads. Of course, our first thought was that the father did it. We checked it out, but he didn't have a motive, no leads to follow up on, same with the mother. Surviving family checked out clean too. The father had a few clients who might have had motive, but the means weren't there. He was a divorce lawyer, but not for anybody who could have taken out an entire family without leaving evidence. There was a chemistry teacher who lived 3 blocks away, and we investigated him for a while because of the canisters, but he alibied out. Same with the dentist who lived nearby. The wife had an online flirtation with some kid out in England, but nothing adulterous, and he wasn't even in the country at the time of the murder. We settled, unhappily, on the idea of a random killing. Hardest pieces of shit to catch when there's no pattern like that. We must have sunk tens of thousands of man-hours into that case, chasing down leads. Nothing ever came of any of it. We did track down the canisters. They were stolen from a laboratory 10 miles away. There was no security footage. We couldn't find any leads on the thief. After 6 months with no repeat attacks, the investigation went cold. The Driscolls had been knocked out and abducted. Like I said, no one ever found the bodies. Who was to say they hadn't just run off? Until, well, I'd rather only talk about that once. What can you tell us about how the confession wound up with Miss Bamer? She'd been following the case for some years, both personally and as a reporter. Like I said, it captured the imagination of a lot of people. Even seemingly normal folks thought it could have been aliens, ghosts, or demons. Miss Bamer published a retrospective on the murders, given the 20-year anniversary. It caused a renewed interest, which happened from time to time. As usual, I declined to comment, citing lack of new evidence. I remembered her asking for my quote, though, which is why I accepted the lunch meeting. After publication of the article, Miss Bamer claimed that she had been sent a file. She wished to have me authenticate. The most pertinent part of the file was the confession. I assured Miss Bamer that such false documents are not uncommon, especially on older cases like this, and that I'd personally heard 24 confessions of the Driscoll murders. She was insistent. Once I felt she wasn't trying to pull off a hoax or getting off on the idea of talking about murder, I agreed to the meeting. She stated that the confession had been mailed to her in the same envelope she had shown to me when we met for lunch. Can you describe its contents? Old newspaper clippings outlining the progress of my investigation. They seemed appropriately yellowed, so I'd guessed that they were from a trophy book of the perpetrator. There were also 6 photos alleging to be the individual members of the Driscoll family, as well as several other photos of the facility where they had been taken. Here, look at that. My hands won't stop shaking, see? I'm trying as hard as I can, and I just can't make it happen. I'll have to ask the paramedic for a sedative when I'm done with this statement. I don't think I'll be able to sleep otherwise. No, I'm fine for now. I don't want anything to interfere with my recollection for your recordings. Just carrying it around in my head is like... Sorry. I'll stay focused. The photos were of the Driscoll family, of course. At the time, I didn't know that. The photos had aged poorly, and they could have been anyone. It was very hard to distinguish features. However, given the elaborate nature of the file, I figured it did warrant a further look. As to the confession letter, it was brief. It gave an address. That's the first thing we noticed. I couldn't locate the address online, which meant it had to be old. The confession letter said, "Stop printing lies. I never killed anyone. It just took a while to get them ready for breakfast." There was no signature. And I just remembered something. God damn it. We got sent a breakfast menu the month after the disappearances. Someone had drawn a red circle around a picture of pancakes. The letter said, "They're not dead. They're just getting ready for breakfast." We put it in the junk lead file. Oh, God. Detective Milgate, do you need a moment? Oh, God. How could I have known? We tried to track down that menu. We could never find out where it had come from. It wasn't any place local. The identifying information had been cut out. I don't know what else we could have done. Dear God. Why did you decide to personally investigate the location mentioned in the letter? Sorry. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't a hoax. I still wasn't convinced. I've had 20 years of people sending me fake evidence. I guess maybe the case captured my imagination too. I always figured one day I'd think of something I'd overlooked and solve the whole thing. It felt unbelievable to have someone dump the answer in my lap. I needed to see with my own 2 eyes. Miss Bamer had pinpointed the location with city records, but neither of us was sure if it was still there. It was an abandoned industrial building. The last time it had a valid mailing address was 50 years ago. It might have caved in for all we knew. I think I also just wanted to be the one to crack it. Whether or not it was dumped in my lap, that case has hung over my head for 20 years. Miss Bamer and I agreed to meet there the following
Guns
week.
blazing.
Can you describe the crime scene? Yes. It was an industrial building, as I stated. Approximately 120 feet long by maybe 45 feet wide. It was a wooden structure, and at first the conditions seemed to match the new building. However, I noticed the facade had been recently patched in a few locations. Further investigation also revealed that the entrance had been chained and locked. My understanding was that it used to be a sheet metal shop. At least... Excuse me. Is there a garbage can? I might vomit. Thank you. Sorry. thought it was empty. But you never forget the way a corpse smells. Bad enough, they had that same smell. I hadn't forgotten how to pick a lock, so I let myself inside. You know, I really do wish they had I really do wish they had a serial killer. I really do. Please, say you believe me. I do. Can you describe the interior of the building? I'm just trying to focus through this. I really am. I'm sorry, it's just that I'd like to go to sleep for a very long time. Is the paramedic here? Is the sedative ready? Thank goodness. The warehouse was not as abandoned as we were planned. The interior had a hallway with 6 rooms. The construction was old, but visibly newer than the rest of the building. The walls between each room had been soundproofed. There were no windows to the outside or doorways, but the only access was through the hallway. I tried to make Miss Bain leave the apartment. The smell was stronger inside. You could feel it. The smell, it was like a grit getting stuck in your nose, like bits of sand all over your skin. The rooms contained presses, hydraulic presses, 4-foot by 8-foot custom presses. I couldn't figure out what they were at first because they were hovering over what looked like hospital beds. There were IV bags in each one as well as other bags. That's how we kept them alive for so long, of course. I think I might be seeing black spots. Do you need to take a break? The idea of having to start this again is worse than the idea of finishing it. Then please, describe your next course of action. It was obviously an active crime scene. I had no doubt at this point. I was in the law to be a serial killer. I tried to tell Miss Bainer to leave several times. She refused on the grounds that it would not be right to leave me on my own. There wasn't much time to make an issue out of her. My opinion of her was that she was a bit mental, basically alright, and I didn't think she'd be a liability if she stayed out of the way. I had to make a judgment call as to whether or not I should proceed on my own in case the family was somehow, possibly, still alive, and perhaps in danger, or if I should even call for backup. I told my wife where I was going previously, so I knew my absence would be noticed. Neither of us could get self-harm. Sorry, I'm rambling. It was then that I, not even a gasp, it was like a gasp, but not really. I don't want to describe it any more than that. There was a sound that drew my attention further on. I had to act, and that's all that matters. There were some stairs at the very far end of the warehouse descending into the basement. I told Miss Bamer to remain behind and pulled my service revolver. I had a flashlight on my person as well, and turned it on as I descended into the basement. The basement had been hand-dug, maybe even over the course of the entire 20-year disappearance. I don't know. The floor was dirt, and there was a tunnel that retreated back far enough that it had to be supported with struts at regular intervals. When my flashlight first illuminated the stack, I wish they'd been dead. I wish he'd been a serial killer. Please, take a moment. After I recovered, my first thought was, thank God, they're all dead. I'm 64 years old, for Christ's sake. I'm not a young man who can forget things anymore. When you're young, you have this sense that you're invincible. I don't have that to protect me anymore. Look at me lying all that onto them. It's my fault. I should have found them. Saved them somehow. I'm sorry, Hob. I've got to ask. Can you describe the scene? Yeah. I can't. I didn't know what I was looking at first. Hell, I still don't. It was a stack. Maybe 2 feet thick. From the stink and coloring, it was obviously made of flesh. I thought maybe he'd hacked them up and stacked them up in pieces. That would have been bad enough. The first thing that alerted me to the truth was the eyeball. On the top of the stack, there was a perfectly round eyeball in the middle of a socket that had been distorted to the size of a saucer. That's when I realized what I was looking at. 20 goddamn years of torture, basically. He had the entire Driscoll family under those presses for 20 years, keeping them alive on an IV drip, increasing the pressure on them so that very slowly their bodies had time to adapt until they'd be flattened like pancakes. He squished them by about 1/4 of an inch every year for 20 years. Then he'd pull them out when they were too broken and wrenched to move without any chance of recovery and stack them on top of each other. I've got no idea what for, I don't want to know. And I was still thinking, thank God, they're all dead. And the one on top started gasping again. What did they say? Nothing at first. He couldn't speak without help. I think it would have been Avery Driscoll. Not that I could tell much about the gender or the age, but their hair was blonde, where there was hair. The head was a mess of scars. I think the son of a bitch who did this must have removed parts of their skulls. I've got no idea how he got their heads so flat otherwise. Not as flat as the rest of the bodies, but flat. Who the hell knows how their brains handled that? Their lips were punctured by teeth everywhere. After the presses had flattened out their noses, I guess. Avery was 14 when he disappeared. A machine, a sort of pump. I followed a hose with my flashlight and realized everyone in the stack was hooked up to the pump. I don't think they could breathe on their own. See, not after a while. There simply wasn't enough volume for their lungs to inflate. There was some sort of opening cut right in the middle of their chest. There was a switch on the pump. I don't know why I pressed it. I was in a panic. I wanted to do something. Maybe some stupid part of me thought that if I switched it on, they could inflate and be okay. I switched it. It increased the volume of air to the topmost hose. I could hear the pump working harder, which is when Avery Driscoll started to scream. He begged me to kill him. He said other things too. It didn't make much sense. He kept yelling "Bane of Error" over and over again. Something about the family too. I didn't understand it. He was in pain, and I would hope he had gone insane several years previously. Oh my God. My thoughts exactly. I didn't know what to do, and he wouldn't stop screaming. I believed he was convinced that I was his torturer. A closer look at his eye revealed that it was mostly a mess of scar tissue. He was as blind as a bat. You know, I spoke to some burn victims once. They told me that they managed to find meaning in purpose. I don't know how anyone in the Driscoll family could have. I stated my name. I told him I was a detective. I told him I was there to help. I repeated it over and over again, knowing of course that there was nothing that anyone anywhere could do to help. Miss Bamer arrived, drawn by the sound. Before she saw the stack, she told me that I had screamed and she had come to help, but I do not remember having done so. Nevertheless, she arrived. Then she saw the stack and screamed, but I was intent on Avery Driscoll. He was able to hear. He became lucid after a few moments. It was a strain to understand what he said, but I'll never be able to forget it. Please kill me. It hurts. I don't want to be a monster. Please kill me. It's my family. I died a long time ago. I don't know if they're still looking for me. Don't tell them what happened to me. Please. He could still cry, and he did, although his tear ducts were too deformed for it to be noticeable. I should have forced him to stand or leave. That is the only action in which I regret more than failing to solve the case 20 years ago. Not for her own sake, but for what she did next. I don't think she could have wounded them any more deeply if she tried. She took away the last comfort any of them had discovered. She said, "That's all them, isn't it? That's the entire Driscoll family. They're all alive. For 20 years, each member of the Driscoll family had been unaware that their fellow inmates were the other members of their family. They'd all been holding out hope that their family was okay. All of them knew that someone out there loved them and was free from suffering. Do you know what the screams of 6 people tortured by 2 decades, smashed down to the width of 4 inches, sounds like when their house stacked on top of one another? It sounds like the gates of hell swinging open. I think that's enough, Detective Milgate. Not yet. It was my mistake. I should have tried harder. Tracked down that lead. Maybe that's what they meant. Screaming that. It was my error, so it was my responsibility. Mercy is hard, but I owed it to them. I'm the one who failed to save them. It only took one bullet to go all the way through. I emptied the revolver, though, to make sure they didn't fight. To give them that final piece. It was the only kindness I had to give them. I left to call for backup after that. Neither Miss Bamer nor I wished to remain with the bodies. I elected not to follow the crime scene investigators back into the basement. I asked if I could make my statement and leave, and after one of them saw what I had seen... May I have my sedative now? Yes, of course. Thank you. Please show in the paramedic. My wife has diabetes, so I'm well aware of the routine. Oh, and please make sure you have the same courtesy available from Miss Bamer. She seemed to have it worse than me after. Do you know where she is? She told the lead that she was home.
I haven't been able to reach her. Did you try the paper? Which paper? The Daily World. Are you sure? There is no one by the last name of Bamer on staff with the Daily World.
Nice work. Well done.
Everyone has tales about the strange and bizarre. My story is about how my half-whole mask saved my life, and continues to save my life to this very day. Late in December, I was traveling north from California to my home state of Oregon. Nothing fancy, I was just going to visit the family for the holidays. On my way north, I hit a small snowstorm. Nothing awful, just a lot of snow falling all at once. I wasn't worried about the small increase of snow at first, considering I had snow tires installed before I started my long journey home. I did, however, get a little hesitant to drive when the snow started to really come down. The large amount of falling snow, coupled with the large amount already littering the ground as I traveled higher into the mountains, caused me to consider finding a place to stay for the night. I figured I could get some sleep while the storm passes over. That, and the fact that I could give my car's heater a break before it would decide to burst into flames, or worse, just stop working at all. I scanned as much of the landscape as I could, but there were no buildings in the immediate area. The only other option that I had for my predicament was to keep driving and hope there was a town or exit nearby that I could take in order to escape from this storm. I must have been driving for at least an hour before I saw a sign up ahead indicating how far the closest city was. My heart sank a little when I read 162 miles, as it flew by my windshield and vanished into the snowy night. At this point, the snow was beating against my windshield, and I knew that I wasn't going to last 162 minutes, let alone 162 miles. The digital clock on my radio read 1:21 a.m., and I decided that the next turnoff I saw I would take, and hope that I could find a neighborhood that would produce some results of my current endeavor. My thought process was either freeze to death in my car, or stay the night at some random person's house. Weighing the two options in my head, I picked the only thing a sane person would pick and go with the house. Another 30 minutes flew by, and still no luck finding a place to pull off. Just when I started to lose hope, I saw a turnoff in the distance. A small shape started to make its way closer into my headlights, and on further inspection, it was revealed to me that there were two wooden poles that possibly belonged to a fence. When I turned onto the road between the two wooden poles, the ground beneath me felt rocky and rough, like I was traveling on gravel. I didn't drive for too long before I started to see a small cabin creep into my field of view. The lights in the cabin were off, but the place seemed to be in good shape. I parked my car under a tall, wild-looking tree that took residence on the cabin's front lawn. Getting out of my car, I immediately grabbed my extra jacket and put it on, pulling the half-whole mask I wore around my neck and up over my ears to keep the heat around my face. I put my cap on and trudged up to the cabin. As I traveled through the cold, windy night up to what I felt was my salvation, I immediately regretted not getting my gloves for my hands. Despite the irritation I had with my hands, my face and the rest of my body were comfortably warm, so I didn't have too much room to complain. I stuffed my frozen hands deep into my pockets and continued my journey across the cabin's lawn. As I made my way to the door, I noticed something odd. There were no indications of life anywhere. There wasn't even a car in the front yard. Taking my right hand out of my pocket, I knocked 3 times, waiting patiently before saying, "Hello? Is anyone in there? I'm sorry to bother you so late, but I need a place to stay for a few hours." Nothing answered my plea for help, so I knocked 3 more times on the door, hitting my knuckles harder against the aged wood of the entrance. "Hello?" I said again, a little louder, before continuing with, "I'm not here to rob you or anything. I just need a place to stay for the rest of the night. I promise I'll be gone by sunrise." As I finished my sentence, I touched the ornate metal door handle. Noticing that the door seemed to be unlocked, I said in a loud voice, "I'm coming in now. If there's anybody in there, let me know now, please." I pressed the metal lever down, finding it a bit odd that the door was unlocked, and opened the door with little resistance on the other end, closing it behind me with about the same resistance, despite the fact the door looked really old. Looking around the area, I noticed the cabin had 5 rooms. A living room, which was the biggest room, a small kitchen, an even smaller washroom, and what I assumed were 2 small bedrooms in the back. No lights were on inside the cozy cabin, making it almost pitch dark, if my eyes weren't already adjusted to the darkness from outside. I decided the best thing to do would be to search for the light switch, so I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight after scanning the walls. My screen produced no results, however, and at the risk of losing precious battery power on my phone, I decided the best option would be to turn off the light and put my phone on airplane mode. Before turning off my light, I studied the paintings hanging on the wall that I glossed over in the initial scan. Each painting that crossed my sight was just typical landscapes or harbors, things like that. There was a painting that looked like a fox hunt or something, but other than that, it was just typical paintings you would see hanging on the walls around an elderly person's home. There was one painting, however, that caught my attention. The painting was small and consisted of what looked like 2 adults, a mother and father, a teenage girl, and a small child. The family captured in that painting were wearing what looked like Victorian-era clothing. I'm guessing about the clothes, and they could have been from the 1800s or the early 20th century. The point is that the clothing was very ornate and regal. There was something really disturbing about the image in the painting. The faces of each family member looked like they were smoothed over with clay. It's kind of hard to describe it, but the 3 family members looked like they had no facial features. By no facial features, I mean instead of the normal facial features you and I have, the 3 people in the painting had grooves of smooth flesh where normally you would have an eye, nose, or mouth. The only person in the painting that didn't possess a blank face was the teenage girl. She had normal facial features for a teenage girl. I pulled myself away from the painting to take a glance at my phone for the time. My phone indicated that it was past 2 o'clock in the morning, so I decided to go to the back room and check to see if it was occupied. To my relief, the room was vacant, besides a medium-sized bed, ornate dresser, and nightstand. The walls were blank besides more sappy paintings to give a little more atmosphere. Although there was no indication of a heating system besides a chimney, the rooms were bearable enough that I figured I could just bundle up in my clothes under the covers in order to stay warm. I was only going to be there a few hours anyway, so there wasn't much point in starting a fire. Plus, the people who owned the cabin wouldn't be back tonight, considering how late it was. I hopped into the worn-out bed, facing the bedroom door. Next to that, there was another door that I assumed was a closet, and pulled my half-whole mask completely up and over my face to make sure my head would stay nice and warm. Pulling the fabric of my mask down slightly, I set the alarm on my phone for 4:30 a.m. and put it back down on the nightstand. I covered my face and bundled up tightly with the sheets, closing my eyes and letting dreamland take me away. Until I woke up after what felt like minutes to the sound of scratching. My body froze as I heard the noise over and over again, softly coming from the closed door. I tried to relax myself by thinking the noise that I heard was just a rat or some other animal that was spending the night in the closet while the cabin's owners were away. Quietly, I shifted onto my back, pulling my half-whole mask down slightly, giving me a small window to look at what was out there. I laid on the bed, stiff as a board, with my cap and mask covering my face in such a way that it acted like a visor, giving me a small peek at what was in the darkness. Thankfully, my eyes were still adjusted to the dark, which gave me a small amount of reassurance as I continued looking in the direction the scratching noise was coming from. The scratching continued louder and longer for what seemed like minutes until, just like that, it suddenly stopped. Silence filled the room again, but it wasn't a safe kind of silence. The deafening silence in the room was a foreboding, ominous sort of silence. The vacuum of sound in the air was the type of silence that happens in a movie just before something jumps out at you. Just when I began to calm myself down, the doorknob to the closet began to jiggle and turn very slightly. My heart was racing out of my chest as I saw and heard the knob turn, and every inch of my body wanted to bolt out of that bed and out of the cabin before whatever was on the other side of that door got out after me. I laid perfectly still on the bed, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins.
There it is. I'm going to show you how to husk the coconut really quick using the sharp stick. I'm going to show you how to do it with my teeth. Check it out, right here. Right here, toss off. How fast is that? Huh? Pretty cool, huh? So here's the coconut. Here it is, right here. Ta-da! Cut the coconut. You use a knife if you want to. Smaller than this, maybe bigger than this. But don't use the very sharp edge of the. It might go right through. If you're not experienced, it's the back of the knife. Make sure it doesn't bounce to your face or your ears come off. Make sure you have the face of the coconut right there. 2 eyes, a mouth, and nose right here. And you cut right across the line between the eyes. Very simple. Right there. See how that? This is for you at home. You don't have a rock in your house. Use the knife. All right? Pretty good. You want some? We're going to show you how to climb the coconut. I'm going to show you how it's done right. Don't do it wrong. Do it right. Okay? What we use here, bark of the wild hibiscus. Remember there's low hibiscus, there's hibiscus, but this is wild hibiscus. Let's do it. Put it around your feet like this. The figure eight. Sure you keep them apart all the time. You can't choose them like this or you're gonna fall. One hand goes here, one hand goes here. Push them like this. See that? Ready for this? Let's go. Hey, welcome to the top of the world, my friends. I'm going to show you how to pick a coconut. You know this is the tree of life. It gives so much and much and much and never stop giving. I'm going to share with you where the juice is at. Right here, watch me. Yeah, no, that's it. I saw something in my teeth. Let me show you how to cut it. Very good. See that? The best drink ever. Right in the mountain, we got coconut. Now you know how to do it. Please do not do it if you don't know how to do it. Let's go down. Let's do it upside down. When you fall up. Let's do it! We're going to share with you how we make the fire. We use the wild hibiscus.
telling me to get out of there. My eyes widened as the door to the closet opened slightly, and I saw what looked like a dried head attached to an elongated neck pop out of the opening, followed by a skeletal body. The thing that was emerging from the closet crawled on all fours out of the doorway and slowly made its way to the bed I was sleeping in. I had never been more frightened in my whole entire life as the thing stood up, almost touching the ceiling of the cabin, and looked down in my direction. The creature stood there studying me as I peeked through the thin slit in my mask, pure terror swirling around in my mind as I glanced up at the body of the creature. Looking at the creature's skeletal face, I noticed that it had no eyes in its eye sockets, which led me to believe that it couldn't even see me. Just when the idea of it not being able to see started to give me a little comfort, the creature began to speak.
Strange.
The creature whispered softly as it continued to watch me, and then began to speak again.
It has no fear of me.
The creature began to say in a hoarse tone as it began to breathe loudly, continuing to look at me and gripping down on the edge of my bed. Feeling the creature's bony hand touch the edge of the bed caused my brain to go into complete panic mode. The only thing that stopped me from jumping up was the thought that maybe the creature believed I was dead or asleep and wouldn't attack.
How can it not fear? How can it not fear me?
The thing said through clenched teeth before loudly gasping and suddenly pulling back with its mouth open in an expression that seemed like fear.
It has no face.
The thing whispered to itself as it continued to back away.
It has no face.
The creature said again, but this time louder than before and slightly more threatening.
It has no face.
The creature shouted as it backed off further away from the bed. I heard the thing breathe loudly and quickly before calming down and slowly returning to the side of the bed. Leaning over me slowly, the creature continued to look down at me before softly beginning to breathe on my face. I could smell its foul breath even through my mask. The smell was so powerful that it took all of my strength not to gag as a reflex to the awful stench. In my mind, I made the choice to keep motionless and not do or say anything that could compromise whatever illusion I was giving the thing that was currently studying me. The creature breathed on me again. The stench I smelled from its breath could only be described as pure death, which only strengthened my resolve to stay perfectly motionless. The creature whispered at me again, leaning in close to me to the point where I could see and smell its decayed flesh. The creature slowly reached for me, its hand slowly moving towards my face. With every inch that the decayed hand moved, I couldn't help but feel my situation becoming more and more dire. I thought that this was it for me. The creature would kill me tonight, or take me away and torture me, and no one would know what happened to me. No one would find my body out here, and no one would know my story. I could feel tears start to well up in my eyes as I thought of everyone I ever loved being yanked away from me in this one moment.
No face, no face, no face, no face.
The creature slowly chanted as its hands crept ever closer to my face. I could hear the anguish in the creature's voice as it continued chanting over and over as it reached for me. As the creature's long bony hand crept only centimeters away from my face, I braced myself for the worst, making the last thoughts I would ever have about the people who I loved. Just as I thought my life was all over, a sudden loud noise erupted from the room, filling my ears with a flood of beeps coming from the nightstand and causing the creature to scream and jump back. As the noise continued, the creature threw itself back against the wall, shrieking uncontrollably in terror as it stumbled back towards the closet. I was dumbstruck for a second before the thought came to me that I had set my alarm for 4:30, which must have been the source of the noise. I jumped out of bed, grabbing my phone and pointing the lit-up screen at the monster as the alarm continued to ring loudly. The loud ringing caused the monster to shriek even more in confusion and terror as it retreated quicker as I approached. Seeing my chance, I activated the phone's flashlight and put it on strobe in order to disorient the monster further.
No face, no face, no face.
The creature shrieked at me as it withdrew to the safety of the closet. I continued to shine my light at the creature, and for added effect, I started playing loud music as I continued to jab my phone in the monster's direction like a lion tamer. The thing threw itself into the dark recesses of the closet, and I shoved the door back, locking it after I slammed it closed. The shrieks coming from the monster started to get fainter and fainter, like it was retreating deeper into the house. I could hear the creature yell out as it got further and further away. After hearing the last retreating words of the thing that terrified me, I bolted from the cabin at breakneck speed, jumping into my car and floored it off the gravel road. I was shaking all over as I drove, and as I pulled my mask down, my exposed skin was as white as the snow that littered the ground. I was so terrified by the whole experience, as soon as I pulled into the first town I saw, I parked my car and began to sob uncontrollably for a while. The experience that I'd been put through would scar me for life, but as I wept in my car in the parking lot of a 7-Eleven, I couldn't help but start to laugh a little bit in between my fits of crying. I got through my ordeal without so much as a scratch on me. Well, besides the mental scars, I was fine. I was alive, and I didn't have to worry anymore. After I finished my whole episode of crying and laughing like an insane person, I entered the store, sniffling and wiping away the rest of my tears. As I continued into the store, the cashier looked up at me and traced my direction with his eyes before continuing with what he was doing. The store was mostly empty, besides an elderly couple. I was the only customer in there. I had a rough night, huh? You have no idea. I noticed you looked a bit upset when you came in. What happened? Did you get dumped or something? He said, looking up at me as the register computed how much I owed him. Looking at the young man behind the register, he seemed a little younger than I was, although that didn't say much because even though I'm 22, I look younger than my actual age. I looked at the cashier's name tag for a second before feeling that I had nothing to lose by telling him about the night I just had. The small name on his ID read Evan, and as I finished telling him my frightened tale, something odd happened. I expected him to burst out laughing or say I was the best liar he had ever talked to. Instead of doing any of that, Evan just stood there, his skin milk white, as he stared at me with an expression so horrified, he gave me the impression that he just witnessed someone run over by a train or something. Evan, are you alright? I said, looking into his eyes while we both stood there quiet. What? Oh, yeah, it's just... Evan began to say before his thoughts trailed off due to the new feeling that we were both being watched. I began to feel eyes burned into the back of my head before turning around to see the old couple I glanced at when I entered the store beforehand. The old couple possessed the same horrified look that Evan had just a few seconds ago. They must have heard the whole story I told. After a few moments of silence, the old couple asked me what I knew about the cabin, to which I couldn't really say. I gave them the best description I could about what I saw. The couple proceeded to tell me about the cabin, how long it's been there, and that it was haunted by a presence so terrifying that the place was condemned and left to rot away after so many people disappeared there. They told me that no one who has ever stayed in that cabin has ever been seen alive again, if they've ever been seen at all after their visit. One of my best friends stayed the night in that cabin, Evan said quietly as he stared off into the distance, but continued his thoughts with, I refused to go into that cabin. I knew something bad would happen if we went. I tried so hard to convince him that the dare was stupid and to not go in, but he refused to be labeled as a chicken and continued with the dare. Evan's eyes began to water as he continued with the story. I never saw him again after that night. I kept calling his house, but his parents couldn't find him. We put out flyers, but we never had any luck. After a few days, we contacted the police, and I told them about the cabin. Evan began to choke down tears as he clenched his fist. They found him in the basement of the cabin, sprawled out on the floor. His eyes were surgically removed from his eye sockets. His nose was removed, and his lips, they were sliced off. When they found him, he was naked, with an incision from the bottom of his ribcage to his pelvis, down the middle of his body. All of his internal organs were extracted from his body, and to add insult to injury, his genitals were sliced clean off. But you want to know the worst part of it all? When the police did an autopsy, they found he was alive during the whole process. Evan winced as he remembered the whole gruesome sight and said, they never found who or what did it. There was no DNA evidence to convict anybody. They didn't find the tools that made the incisions, and they didn't find anything. Evan clenched his fist tighter on the table before the old man, listening to our conversation, put his hand on Evan's shoulder to reassure him that it was going to be all right. As he comforted Evan, he looked at me and said, people have been disappearing from that area for decades, maybe even centuries for all we know, but the bodies always end up the same gruesome way. I don't care who you are, no one deserves something like that to happen to them. They should just torch that evil place to the ground. The old lady joined her husband's side and looked at me with the most foreboding face I'd ever seen.
If your story is true, you should consider yourself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. In all my years of living, you are the only one to go into that cabin and come out alive.
The woman said, gripping onto her husband's hand tightly as she spoke. After hearing the old woman's words, I realized that Evan said the body of his friend was found in the basement, which explains why the monster's voice got fainter. It would have pulled me into the basement if my phone hadn't gone off. I quickly paid for my items and left the store, more troubled now than I was when I entered. Feeling drowsy due to the lack of sleep and constant adrenaline rush caused by my whole terrible ordeal, I decided to go to a hotel and spend the day sleeping and relaxing to get my mind off things. That night, I sat on the bed in my hotel room and looked at the two items that saved my life. In one hand, I gripped onto my half-whole mask, which hid my face from that terrible monster. In my other hand, I held my cell phone, which scared away the horrible beast that could have killed me. I decided that from that day on, I would always wear my half-whole mask to bed. It saved my life. That's the least I can do for it. The recent brush with death I had just experienced had taught me that life is too precious to waste. So I decided to ask my best friend Samantha out on a date, and things worked perfectly. Samantha and I were together for 2 years before I recently asked for her hand in marriage, which she said yes. Part of me will never forget that awful night, and because of it, not only have I been wearing the half-whole mask to bed every night since then, I've also made it a priority to not live in any type of house that has a basement. I, as an added safety measure, started locking every door before going to bed. It's a pain, but you can never be too careful. Despite these crazy precautions, Samantha has accepted my little quirks and has continued to be supportive as we continue our journey through life together. I couldn't be happier with the way things turned out in my life. I'm so lucky to be with Samantha. Everything's perfect. There's just one thing that bothers me. I think I might just have to blame my imagination, but sometimes when I wake up at night, when it's really quiet, sometimes I'll hear soft scratching noises. Also, and I think it's just paranoia, but I swear, sometimes I hear something whisper "no face" from inside my closet. Hey dude, do you remember the first time we met? Asked my friend Ryan with a huge smile stretched across his face. Hell yeah, man. It was, we were at... Well, that was weird. I couldn't remember it at all. In fact, I couldn't actually remember anything about Ryan. The only things about him that I could bring to mind were that his name was Ryan and we've been friends ever since we were kids. I could remember the basic outline of our story, but not a single detail. No, I don't. Damn, dude, neither do I. Ryan laughed. That's fucking weird as hell, man. He was right. That was weird. That was very, very weird. What the fuck, Ryan? Why can't I remember anything about you? I have no clue, my dude. Ryan laughed. I sat down into my chair, burrowing deep until only the top of my head was left barely poking out from between the cushions. Ryan was laughing pretty hard, which was annoying, but what really bothered me was that I couldn't bring up a single memory from my past. It felt like I had simply been conjured into existence 2 minutes ago, and only given the cliff notes of my life's history. Maybe my strange memory loss was because I was tripping on shrooms? I've done shrooms with Ryan numerous times before, so it was a possibility. I felt a flicker of hope at the remembrance of past events until I realized that I didn't actually remember ever doing shrooms with him. I knew that we'd done shrooms several times before, but I didn't actually have any memories of doing them. It was like reading a plot synopsis on Wikipedia about a movie you'd never actually watched. Ryan was laughing so hard that he was gasping for air. It was really pissing me off. Didn't he realize how fucking serious this was? He probably did, and that's why he was laughing so hard. He was laughing at me. My mental state was in ruins, and if he found that hilarious, I probably had a psychic alien brain parasite from hell squirming through my gray matter, feasting on my memories, and he thought it was funny. That really pissed me off. God damn it, Ryan, shut your fucking mouth before I rip your fucking throat out! Without even bothering to wait for a response, I leapt out of the couch and charged at him like a bull. I tackled him to the ground and plunged my thumbs into his eye sockets. I started slamming his head against the hardwood floor over and over again, feeling his skull crack and shatter as his brain fell out onto the floor, which I promptly smashed into a puddle of goo and started shoveling into my mouth. Oh yeah, that's good. Wait. No, I didn't. I'm not sure why I thought I brutally murdered Ryan and ate his brain, but I didn't. In fact, I hadn't even gotten up from the couch. That was weird. Ryan wasn't laughing anymore either. He was staring at me with a look of concern. "Are you alright, dude?" he asked gently. Yeah, of course. Okay, you had me worried. That was some pretty hardcore brain surgery you had this morning, and the doctor said it could take 10 to 50 years before you feel normal again. Did I undergo brain surgery? I don't remember having brain surgery, and I feel like brain surgery is something that would be hard to forget. I decided to play it safe by pretending that Ryan was telling the truth. There was no point in poking the bear. Ah, yes, the brain surgery, of course. What was the brain surgery again? I don't know, dude. I'm not a neurologist. I think they removed your cerebral cortex or something to help you quit smoking. I smoke? Not anymore. It was a very convenient story. It perfectly explained my memory issues and why I wasn't smoking a cigarette at that exact moment. It wrapped everything up in a neat little package with a bow on top. Oh yes, it was a very convenient explanation. Very, very convenient. It was far too convenient. That's how I knew it was a lie. But of course, what a splendid explanation, Ryan. What you just said is definitely true, and I totally believe you for sure. Yep, no doubt about it, I said, trying to play it off smooth in order to convince him that I believed his obvious lie. I was pretty sure he bought it. Hey, dude, do you remember the first time we met? Asked my friend Ryan with a huge smile across his face. Oh, hell yeah, man. It was, we were in Vietnam? Well, that was a weird question. Ryan had been my squad mate in the trenches of Vietnam ever since he saved my life from a German sniper. We've been best friends. I remember that day like it was happening right now. It's something I'll never forget for as long as I live. I was honestly outraged by his insinuation that I could ever forget that moment. I'm only alive because he risked his own life to save mine. Damn, dude, I totally forgot we were in Nam. Ryan laughed. That's fucking weird as hell. He was right. That was weird. That was very, very weird. What the fuck? Ryan, how did we serve in Vietnam when we were born in the 90s? I have no clue, my dude. Ryan was laughing so hard that he was gasping for air. It was really pissing me off. I saved his worthless life in that trench and he just fucking forgot? Maybe I should have let him die. Something about this whole situation was off. There was something wrong that I couldn't put my finger on. Things weren't adding up right. Hey man, did we take any shrooms? What kind of stupid-ass question is that? Ryan laughed, barely able to choke out the words through his wheezing laughter. Are you fucking retarded or something? Yeah, it was a pretty dumb question. I've done shrooms several times and it's never been like this. This was something else altogether. I lit a cigarette and pondered the situation. The most obvious explanation is that I was dreaming. That would make the most sense, but it didn't feel like a dream. I decided to test my hypothesis by pressing the lit cigarette against my wrist. The agonizing burn was proof that I wasn't dreaming. Pain that intense couldn't happen in a dream. It's possible that I was good old-fashioned crazy, but isn't questioning your own sanity proof that you're sane? A sane person would never realize that they're insane, so would never question it. I'm pretty sure I read that on Wikipedia. So, then what? Hey man, what the hell's wrong with me? I asked Ryan. When I didn't receive a response, I realized that Ryan wasn't there. Well, that's weird. I knew that I had been deep in contemplation for a good while, but I still should have noticed him getting up. He was probably just taking a shit, but I wanted to check anyway, if only for peace of mind. I went to put out my cigarette when I realized I wasn't holding one. That's right, I don't smoke. My grandpa had died of lung cancer when I was 9, and even though he wasn't a smoker, I swore to never touch a cigarette for as long as I lived. It's honestly kind of weird that I thought I was smoking. I've never smoked, and I never will. I tried to stand up when I realized I couldn't. Thick, heavy chains were draped across my lap and chest, securing me to the couch. What the hell? I struggled against them, but couldn't move even a fraction of a millimeter. If anything, the chains were tightening and threatening to cut off my breathing. I tried to scream for Ryan, but my jaw was squeezed far too tight for me to open my mouth. My only option was to go down, deeper into the couch. Not only was that a safe place to hide, but it gave me a greater range of movement. I burrowed deep into the gray folds of the couch, both to hide from whatever was haunting me as well as to search for Ryan. The couch had to lead somewhere, and it seemed logical that it would eventually end up in the bathroom. If Ryan was taking a shit like I suspected he was, he'd definitely be on the toilet. I've never known him to shit anywhere else. I squirmed my way down through the couch until I reached a long, twisting tunnel about 6 feet wide and 20 feet high. The floors and walls seemed to be made of the same gray material as the neon sign that read CC, which I assumed meant currently the crapper, over top a large door. I walked through it and found myself in my bathroom. Ryan was sitting on the toilet like I figured he was. It was time to finally get some answers. Yo, Ryan, what's up, man? Just taking a demon shit. Nice. So, what the hell's going on? Something is clearly not right. Brain parasite. No way, a brain, dude. A brain parasite? How the hell would I get a brain parasite? Is that even a real thing? Seriously? Yep, they're doing surgery right now. Brain surgery. Well, how the fuck did I get a brain parasite? Pork, dude. I told you not to vacation in Vietnam. Sure, that seems cheap as fuck, but they don't have the same quality assurance when it comes to handling of livestock. Look it up on Wikipedia if you don't believe me. Seriously? All of this because I ate some bad Vietnamese pork on vacation? What the fuck? That kind of pisses me off. As I looked around trying to make sense of everything, it dawned on me that this couch seemed awfully familiar. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the walls and floors looked like a brain. Likely my brain. So, is this my brain? Am I literally inside my brain? Well, not literally. You're probably literally in a hospital bed or something. I mean, how could you literally go inside your own brain? That doesn't even make any sense. Think about it. Of course he was right. If I literally went inside my brain, that would mean that my brain was inside my brain like some sort of brainception. That would be ridiculous. Huh. So then, what is the point of all this? Am I psychosomatically trying to fix the problem or something? Like, if I defeat the parasite in here, will that kill it in real life? Nah, dude, that's just dumb. You're probably in a coma and you're hallucinating or something. I mean, you do have a parasite inside your brain, so you've likely suffered brain damage after all. Or maybe a near-death experience. Hell, maybe you're already dead and this is hell. The fuck do I know? I'm not a neurologist. He was probably telling the truth, although I couldn't remember anything about Ryan. He didn't seem like a doctor. He just wasn't really the doctorly type. I wasn't getting that vibe from him at all. So why are you here? I get why I'm here, seeing as how this is my brain and all, but why do you keep showing up? Me? I'm eating your brain. That's kind of my thing. It's literally why I was born. It took me a few seconds to process what he said. Wait a minute. Are you the brain parasite? Did you seriously just now figure that out? I thought you were Ryan. Why the hell would Ryan be inside your brain? My name is Tanya Solian, by the way. Then who the fuck is Ryan? No fucking clue, my dude. Well, that's weird. Aside from Tanya Solian being a pretty stupid name, it still didn't explain much. Why did I think he was Ryan? Actually, I still didn't even know who Ryan was, let alone remember the first time we met. So are you like some kind of psychic brain parasite from hell or outer space or something? Nope, I'm just your standard cyclophilid cestode of the family Taenidae. I was just an egg when you ate undercooked pork with my mom inside it. I hatched in your intestine and then made my way into your cerebral cortex to start a family. Taenisoium's a really stupid name, by the way. I didn't choose it, he said with a shrug. This was all pretty hard for me to process, I have to admit. It didn't much matter because I woke up in a post-surgery hospital bed. The doctors managed to explain the situation a lot better than Taeni did. I had indeed gained a brain parasite, so they had to operate to remove the brain cysts and insert a shunt to drain fluid buildup. Even years later, I can remember the hallucinations vividly. Even though I know that it was all in my head, I can still visualize it like it actually happened. The doctor said the hallucination was likely a result of the anesthesia. If I had suffered any brain damage, it was minor, although I had to take pills for a good while just in case there were any stray parasites lingering inside my body. That's my biggest fear, that another one will end up inside my brain and I'll have to return to that nightmarish place. I obviously no longer eat pork, even if it is FDA approved. I was able to go back to a normal life pretty quickly thanks to the support of my mom, my girlfriend Amy, and Ryan. The real Ryan, not the parasitic hallucination. The memories from my recovery are a bit fuzzy, and I'm still not sure why Taeni manifested in my mind as Ryan, or why he was so concerned about the first time we met. I'll admit that it took me a while to feel comfortable around him again. The image of him as Taeni was so strong in my mind that just being around him made me nervous. I told him all about what happened and we managed to work through it. It wasn't long before we were hanging out like we used to. Pizza, beer, pro wrestling, just like the good old days. That's why it caught me off guard when we were hanging out at my apartment, having a few beers while watching Monday Night Raw. I had a nice buzz going and was feeling pretty good when he turned towards me with a huge smile stretched across his face. Hey dude, do you remember the first time we met? Asked my friend Ryan with a huge smile stretched across his face. Hell yeah, man. It was, we were at... Oh, that was weird. Did you know the early astronomers thought there were oceans on the moon? I asked, looking up from my book. My mom shifted in her bed, a tangle of IV tubes shifting with her.
Of course. The moon seems like the perfect place to find an ocean.
What a shame we never found water then, I said, because those false seas, astronomers called them Maria. Mom smiled.
How sweet of them to name the moon oceans after me.
Well, they didn't find any oceans, I reminded her.
Maybe they just didn't look hard enough.
A little laugh slipping from her lips. From all the pain she was in, all the fear she must feel, my mother always had the kind of laugh that could light a candle. We were in her hospital room, the same one we'd been in and out of for the last year and a half. Sometimes we had a roommate, sometimes we were alone. Always, she held steady enough for both of us. The rock I tied my hope to, the wall against the grief I knew was coming. Cancer is such a mundane word for something so hungry and cruel. I've noticed medicine does that a lot. Covers horrors with tedious language like a bedsheet over a body. Malignant, inoperable, metastasized, terminal. But when she laughed, we weren't in the hospital anymore. We were home. When she laughed, she wasn't sick. She was young again, and I was a kid. And the world was a bright place begging to be explored. What a miracle my mother was. Cancer had taken so much from her, aged and hurt her, but it could never steal her laugh. That was hers to keep. How are we feeling today? The doctor asked. He came in less and less often. We could all sense this was the final stay in this room.
Just brilliant, Doc.
My mom said, struggling to sit a little higher.
We can still go dancing later if you like, though we'll have to ask for my son's blessing. Ever since his dad died, Brian's been very protective of me.
I put on a stern face. I need to know your intentions are pure, Dr. Bradshaw. As the Drivens know. I played along. But I might need a rain check on the dance, Miss Willie. I'm not as young as I used to be. He emphasized his age, running his fingers through gray-white hair. My mom tapped her bare scalp.
Right there with you, Tiger,
she said. Dr. Bradshaw smiled, but I could tell he was burdened. I saw him glance at the small idol I'd placed on my mother's nightstand. The talisman was a miniature oak tree carved from gray soapstone. There were 4 faces etched into the tree, a sentry against ill health and bitter spirits. I could tell the stone tree made the doctor uncomfortable. In all honesty, I had a rough time looking at the idol for more than a few seconds. The faces were each whittled in vivid expression. The face closest to my mother's bed was smiling kindly, and the face pointed towards the door was snarling, meant to ward away harm. The final 2 faces were both weeping. All 4 shapes were too human, too raw. There was a weirdness to the stone tree that put people on edge, but I'd grown used to every shade of weird you can imagine. My mother's side of the family was full of stories of unexplained luck and mysterious tragedy, whispered secrets and unexplained deaths. By all accounts, my maternal grandmother was either an honest-to-goodness witch or full-bore, high-caliber crazy, or both. Probably both. The stone tree was from a box of my grandmother's things I'd found in the attic earlier that month. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but my mom did seem to get better when I brought in the talisman, at least for a little while. I was daydreaming about family history and the odd box, while Dr. Bradshaw checked his charts and Mom's vitals. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" he asked, ripping me back to reality. Dr. Bradshaw tried to keep a light tone, but I could tell he didn't have good news. The hospital hallways smelled like ammonia and birthday cake. Someone must have had a party. Maybe a patient, maybe a nurse. Strange how you remember the insignificant details while your world is crashing down around you. "I'm so sorry," Dr. Bradshaw told me. "The results came in this morning. It's spreading aggressively. We held it back as long as we could, Brian. Your mom is a fighter, but right now we just need to, well, try to keep her as comfortable as we can." Brian? The wall was cracking, grief waiting on the other side, heavy and cold as an empty house. I'd known for months that this was most likely the outcome, but it still hurt to hear. Hurt worse than I could stomach. "There's nothing left to try?" I asked, fighting down the urge to throw up. "Anything? Experimental? Untested? Anything?" Dr. Bradshaw shook his head. "I'm sorry. Sometimes we just run out of options. She fought a good fight." "How long does she have left?" I asked, looking back into her room. She'd fallen asleep. "Not long. Maybe days. Have you considered hospice?" The smell of ammonia and birthday cake. The steady beep of Mom's heart monitor. I tried to focus on the world around me. My hope wasn't dead yet. If medicine couldn't help my mom, maybe something older could. I thought of the box of my grandmother's things waiting in the attic. There was a lot in there I hadn't gone through yet. Books and candles and secrets and lost things. Maybe there was a cure, or at least a way to keep the fight going. "No," I said. "If all that's left is to make her comfortable, I want to take her home." The doctor smiled. "I understand. We can give you some medication, ways to help her with the pain." He put his hand on my shoulder. "Your mom's been in a lot of pain, but she'll have peace soon. You've done all you can." "I know." I lied. "Thank you." Mom lived in a small ranch house 10 miles outside of town. There wasn't much in the way of neighbors besides some woods and a creek slithering through her yard. It was a windy, warm March afternoon when I took my dying mother home. That night, I began my work. I was going to turn the house into a bunker, a maze death could never solve. I would keep my mother safe. I would find a way to keep her alive. The little red book was full of ideas. Running water was an obvious place to start. The creek behind the house was barely a trickle, but it should provide some coverage to the south side of the property. Salt was next, lining the doorways and window frames, then in an unbroken circle around the entire house. This step was to be repeated daily, the book stressed, or even multiple times per day. Even a moderate breeze played holy havoc with any salt poured outside, so it was always best to trace and retrace every few hours. Water and salt were common defenses against man's oldest enemy, and well known. It took me nearly a week to finish carving the symbols and signs into the walls, the floors, even the trees on the property. Sometime around noon on the third day, on my back in the crawl space, etching strange marks onto the underside of the floor, it struck me how ridiculous I was acting. There was no proof that any of the information in the little red book was anything other than the delusional ramblings of a bizarre woman, whom I'd only met once or twice as a child. For all I knew, the runes meant to ward off death were actually a grocery list written in Cantonese. But I was desperate. And every time I saw my mother, she looked frailer, more fragile. So I continued carving and praying and building layers upon layers of protection to keep death far away. Making my marks took me all over the property. It was a big yard, nearly 3 acres that blended gradually into the surrounding forest. I wasn't able to pinpoint the exact boundary where cultivation met nature. The edges simply bled together. But I did my best to create a clean border with lines between the symbols. I'd always loved the wilderness here, the way you could wander a few hundred yards away from home and feel like you traveled hundreds of years into the past, to somewhere primal. This was the perfect playground for a kid, whether I was out exploring trails or trapping minnows or spending the summer building yet another treehouse, convinced this would be the final one. It never was. I was never satisfied. The house itself, though small, was more than enough room for my mother and me. Dad died when I was 7. I don't remember much about him, just how big he seemed, with a bonfire grin and arms that I thought could hold the whole world. My mom often said I took after my father. I could see it in the old pictures of him. We had the same eyes, green as moss in the summer, and the same fiery shock of red hair. Enemy to every comb on the planet. The sicker Mom got, the more often she called me by my father's name. I worried when she drifted away like that, but a part of me was proud she'd mistake me for him. After all the symbols were carved, there were a few steps left in the book to deter death from visiting. There were dozens of charms and talismans in the bottom of the old box in the attic. I sat up there combing through everything my grandmother left behind, referencing the red book, pushing the tiny charms into tidy piles. None of the idols were larger than my thumb. Some were iron and others were wood. Some were heavy, others light. All of them were uncomfortable to look at or touch. The attic was drafty, but not nearly enough to explain the cold that burrowed into me as I sorted the charms. I'm not particularly tall, but the attic felt like it was designed for dolls. Beams so low I couldn't even walk bent over. I moved around on my knees, rough floorboards threatening splinters even through my jeans. I could have taken the box downstairs where I'd have more room, but the idea filled me with a deep unease. It seemed better to leave the box up in the attic, only taking down objects as I needed them. Up here, at least, my grandmother's items, her legacy, was quarantined. The red book was very specific about the distribution of the totals around the house and property. I walked carefully through my mom's backyard, boots plopping in and out of mud, compass in hand. It had rained nearly every day since I'd taken my mom home from the hospital. I knew it was almost certainly a coincidence, but couldn't help wonder if the soft curtains of rain falling to the ground were for her. I placed charms in a compass rose with the house in the middle. The most disturbing objects were given places of honor, each part of a direction. Water, salt, wards, charms, all placed carefully, intentionally. My grandmother's books promised that these would offer some degree of protection against the inevitability of death. The symbols would confuse it, The talisman's distracted, and the water and salt make barriers to slow it down, but death might still find a crack to slip through, so the red book recommended one final trick. There was a small candle in the bottom of the box, dirty white as stained paper. When I took the candle from its case, the smell made me gag. Have you ever walked past a portable toilet in the dog days of summer when it's so hot the blue plastic has started to warp and bubble? Imagine that smell distilled into a finger's worth of wax. I brought the candle downstairs, placed it on the dining room table, and set it alight. The wick caught immediately, the flame burning an unusual red-brown. No heat came off the candle, and it actually seemed cooler the closer I moved my hand to the fire. Once the wax began to melt, the smell was 10 times worse than it had been back in the attic. I choked down a greasy sickness crawling up my throat and quickly left the room, shutting the French doors as I went. That helped trap the odor, but I couldn't shake the sense of nausea. I went to check on my mother.
Do you remember the day you ran away?
My mom asked, sitting in her bed, lunch untouched on the nightstand beside her. I didn't think she had any weight left to lose before she was nothing but bone and memory. Her skin was rice paper over a frame that seemed smaller every day. Her eyes, though, no matter how fragile the rest of her became, remained 2 little lanterns against the dark, blue and bright and alive. I didn't make it very far, I answered. And I wasn't really running away, only stretching my legs. Mom smiled.
You told me you were leaving for the circus. You wanted to be either a lion tamer, or a strong man, or maybe a fire eater.
I think I wanted to be all of that combined. Young me was big on multitasking. My mother turned so she was looking out the window into the backyard.
I was so scared when I found your note. The one saying you were leaving. My hands were shaking like you wouldn't believe when I called the sheriff and then Mr. Jonas down the way. It felt like we were searching for you for half the night. Even though it couldn't have been more than an hour before we found you there. Lost in the woods, wandering around and shivering. You hadn't even brought a jacket.
I sat next to my mom on the bed. Yeah, I didn't exactly plan ahead for my circus escape. I remember getting over the idea real quick, but I couldn't find my way back. I'm glad you found me.
I'm glad, too.
My mother said, and I noticed her wipe away a tear.
I'm so glad. That hour you were gone, Brian, that was the most afraid I've ever been. Afraid we wouldn't find you. Afraid you might be hurt or worse. I couldn't hardly breathe from fear. Then, suddenly, you were there, and the relief nearly knocked me over. I think we stayed up together the rest of the night watching the stars. I wanted to make sure you could find the North Star in case you ever got lost again.
She turned back to me, reached out her thin hand and placed it over mine. There were still tears in her eyes, but she smiled her lighthouse smile, and for a moment, I saw her just as she used to be. Just as she was the night I ran away and my mom found me. I squeezed her hand. I was scared too. I was afraid I'd be stuck out there. What made you think of it?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about dying lately, and...
Don't, I interrupted. Don't talk like that. You're not going anywhere. Not for a long time.
It's okay.
She said, squeezing my hand back.
It's okay. I've known real fear, and what I'm feeling right now, it's not like that. I'm scared, I guess, but I'm at peace with it. I had such a beautiful life. I'm so glad I got to meet you, to be your mom.
I'm glad too, I whispered, the voice breaking on the last word. But I won't let you go without a fight, I added silently in my mind. Something was trying to get my mom. The strangeness began the day after I lit the candle. At first it was small blips, tiny wrongs that I chalked up to my imagination. Doors I knew I'd closed at night were open in the morning. Food began to rot and spoil within days of me bringing it into the house. Eventually, food would go bad within just a few hours. Every few hours, the television in the living room would either turn off if it was running or on if it was off. Clocks would stop overnight, always at 3:03 a.m. And shadows began sticking to the corners of the room, independent of any light sources. The shadows were stubborn, and they would linger for as long as I would stare, and disappear when I blinked. And I began hearing bumps and knocks at all hours, and sometimes, when I'd enter an empty room, I had a sharp, fleeting certainty that it was only just occupied. I avoided the dining room except to check in twice a day to see if the candle was still burning. The smell was vicious and would claw its way into your nose and nostrils the moment it was given a chance. I kept the door to the room shut and kept air fresheners running in the surrounding rooms 24/7. The funny thing was, the candle never went out, and it even seemed to shrink. I could see the wax melting, but day in and day out, the candle refused to change. Days marched into weeks, and the wrongness only grew deeper. My mom and I both lost sleep to vivid nightmares that we couldn't remember when we woke up. Only the echoes remained, but those were enough to leave my pulse sprinting until morning. I started sleeping in a chair in my mother's room. I did this to comfort her if she woke up confused during the night, but also because, if I'm being honest, I was too scared to sleep alone. I felt like a child running into his parents' room, convinced there was a monster under the bed. The thing is, maybe there was. By the third week, I couldn't keep doors closed. They would slam open the moment I left the room. A terrible scratching began inside the walls. I told my mom it might be squirrels or mice, but the sound was so insistent, not like rodents milling about, more like dogs wanting in. I stopped leaving the house for supplies. Instead, I had what little food we ate delivered. I kept the curtains drawn. There was tapping on the glass every night. About a month after leaving the hospital, we were living like zombies. The dining room couldn't contain the smell of the candle anymore, and the entire house was clogged with the scent. Tiny noises had graduated into full-on laughs and screams and whispers in the rooms around us. Something kicked the bathroom door so hard while I was taking a shower that the hinges warped. I covered every mirror in the house. I had started to see things in the corners looking back at me. Half-hidden faces. Shapes that skittered away as soon as I turned around. Mom was drifting further and further away. She had long moments of confusion where she'd forget my name. Forgot where we were. Sometimes she'd think I was my dad. Other times she'd just stare at the wall for hours, growing fainter and fainter each day like a Polaroid left in the sun. But she was alive. It was clear that we were under siege by something. My world shrank to only one room, and every trip to the bathroom or to answer the door for food felt like going over the trenches. The noises kept getting worse and worse, the shadows closer, the sense of movement around the house sharper. Every now and then I would feel hot breath on the back of my neck or walk through a cold patch hanging in the air. I stopped botheringly drawing the lines of salt around the house. I knew, deep in my bones, that as long as the sickly candle burned, death could not take my mom away. On the 33rd day after leaving the hospital, I woke with a start from a nightmare, only to find my mom's bed empty. She hadn't been able to walk the past week at all, so my first feeling was hope that she might be improving, at least a little. Then I noticed the odor we'd been living with for weeks was gone. "Mom!" I shouted, running in bare feet around the room. I found her in the dining room. The door was open as she was standing at the table, frail as a neglected scarecrow, bobbing back and forth. Her hands were hovering over the candle. The flame was out. "Why did you do that?" I whispered. "Mom? Mom, are you okay?" I padded into the room, the wooden floor freezing cold. My mom didn't react to my presence. She just continued rocking side to side. I realized she was still asleep. "Mom?" I gently shook her shoulder. "Wake up!" Her head snapped back and she nearly fell. I caught her on the way down. It felt like she weighed nothing at all.
"What's going on?"
she asked, looking around the room.
"Where?"
"You're okay," I told her. "You were sleepwalking."
"I was having the most unusual dream.
Mom mumbled.
There were so many stars.
She began to shiver uncontrollably. The cold hit me a moment later. I let out a gasp. The house was chilly before, but the dining room was near Arctic. My breath bloomed into a thin cloud in front of my face. I became acutely aware of the complete silence filling the house. Then I heard scratching. It was coming all throughout the house, deep, tearing sounds at the walls around the dining room. Footsteps came immediately after, heavy and fast. Somewhere in the house, a window shattered.
Brian.
My mother said, holding on to me. "Don't worry," I said. "Everything will be..." My voice deserted me as a massive shadow unfolded in the corner of the room. It was shaped like a man, but tall, so very tall, and it was fast. Before I could yell, the shadow was on us, pouring over my mother. In the space of a heartbeat, she was simply gone. "No," I whispered, clawing at the dissolving shadow where my mom used to be. "No, no, 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 no!" The shadow was disappearing like a puddle sinking into the floor. There was a texture to it, oily and too slick to hold. I thought of my mother the night she found me lost in the woods, the night I'd run away. Her face filled my memory, the lighthouse smile. I remember the relief I felt when she found me, the overwhelming love. I held on to that feeling, clutching it close. "You can't have her," I whispered. I closed my fist around the last threads of the shadow. There was a terrible sensation of pulling. It was like I'd caught a horse by the tail and it was trying to shake me, but I held on. A sense of ripping and being dragged. It was a riptide with a mind of its own, but I held on. It could not shake me. The temperature was dropping every second, and I felt my vision growing darker. The last thought that ran through my head before I blacked out was a promise to myself that even if I died, my grip would hold. I wouldn't let my mother's life slip away. All sounds and light faded, narrowing to a pinprick and then going black. I woke up under a field of stars. I was lying in soft grass, still wearing my pajama bottoms and an old t-shirt. It was cool, wherever I was, but comfortably so. I stood up. There were trees all around me, tall and close, stitched together with shadows. Immediately to my right, there was a road that ran straight as far as I could see, blurring into the horizon. But the stars, they were nothing like I'd ever seen before. Bright ribbons of northern lights ripped above me in green and blue and purple. The stars lit the sky like millions of lanterns floating on a still sea. The moon shone sharpest of all, a spotlight hanging above the tree line, so close I thought I could stretch up and brush its face.
You are persistent.
I looked around and couldn't see anyone. A dark spot began to clarify against the gloom. The silhouette separated itself and moved towards me. I recognized it instantly as the shadow from the dining room. As it moved closer, the thing grew and grew until it touched the sky and filled my vision. A deep dread sank into me, but I stood my ground. "Give me back my mom!" I shouted. The silhouette pulled away from the sky, and then it was standing in front of me. The shape and size of a tall man, but instead of a shadow, the thing had wrapped itself in stars. Miniature constellations drifted across its body, floating slowly like a time-lapse of a clear night sky. Burning brightest was the northern star, blue and warm. The space between the stars was absolute black. Not a shadow, but a complete absence of light. It was the most beautiful, terrifying thing I'd ever seen. "What are you?" I whispered.
You know.
It replied. "Give her back," I begged. "Please, give her back."
I can't. It's her time. Past her time. You delayed me, delayed her.
I clenched my fists. "She didn't get enough time. I didn't get enough time. It's not right. It's not fair."
Of course it's not fair.
The starry thing said.
But it is right. You each have your time, and at the end of it, there's me, and there is a road, and we walk it together.
"Where to?" I asked. "Where are you taking her?"
I don't know. It's not for me to know, only to know how to get there.
"Then I won't let you take her." I planted myself in the road. The world was still and solemn around us. The constellations drifted like clouds, and a soft breeze stirred the branches. The starry thing didn't respond for a moment.
Your mother was kind and caring. Wherever she goes, she'll have peace.
it promised. But the creature raised its hand.
Did you ever stop to think that death isn't an enemy? Death simply is. It is the natural partner to life. It knows no prejudice or malice, has no designs or ambitions. Your mother spent so long suffering, felt so much pain. Instead of letting her rest, you took it upon yourself to draw her life beyond its given course. You kept her alive, but at the cost of stretching her thin, prolonging her sickness, deluding her. Did you keep her alive for her benefit or for yours?
I couldn't answer.
Stretching a life is unnatural, dangerous.
It told me.
In the weeks you kept me away, you drew the attention of old things, hungry things, forces that would like nothing better than to swallow even the memory of your mother, to tear and bite until there was nothing left but pain and fear and a perfect emptiness.
I shuddered, remembering the clawing sounds, the shattered window, and the laughter from empty rooms. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Can they hurt her here? Is she safe?" The stars in the shadow burned brighter for a moment.
Your mother won't walk her road alone. None of you do. I walk with you, always, to the end.
"Can I see her?" I asked. "Please, just let me say goodbye." It considered for several seconds.
You are persistent.
Then the starry thing was gone. I was standing alone on an empty road.
Brian?
I turned to find my mother behind me on the road. She looked younger, healthier than I'd seen her in years. The frailty was gone, and my mother seemed exactly as I remembered her when she found me in the woods all those years ago.
"Isn't this the most beautiful dream?"
she asked, staring up at the night sky. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "A beautiful dream. I love you, Mom. I love you so very much." She smiled and touched my cheek.
"I love you too. Don't cry. It's okay. I'll wake up any time now. I'll see you then."
I nodded, wiping at tears. "Sure. Yeah. I'll see you then."
"What do you think is at the end of the road? Do you think I'll have time to find out before I wake up?"
she asked. I looked out at the road, scanning the trees for any hungry shadows. I don't know. I don't know where it goes, but promise me you'll be careful." My mom smiled wider.
"Of course I'll be careful."
"And she won't walk alone," said a familiar voice behind us both. I turned, expecting the starry thing, but the man standing on the road was entirely normal. The light from the moon was enough that I could see he had moss-green eyes and a bright shock of red hair.
"Such a beautiful dream,"
my mother said. The man came towards us and took my mother's hand. He and I looked so alike. I could see why my mother confused us when she was sick. "Take care of her," I told the man. I just... Please, take care of her. Make sure she gets where she's going. There are things out there that want her to hurt her. It's my fault. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The man squeezed my shoulder. "She'll be safe, watched over. If the devil himself is waiting on the road ahead, he'll move or he'll be moved." I believed him. Thoughts raced through my head. There were so many things I wanted to say, questions, a million ways to say goodbye. I wanted to stretch out the moment for as long as I could, but I realized I'd already delayed my mother enough. "I love you," I told them both. "Goodbye." I woke up back in my dining room, sitting at the table, the unlit candle in front of me. The house was quiet and still. There was no more scratching, no sound or sense of life at all. I walked through every room. The house was empty. I was alone. I spent the past couple months working on the house, erasing the marks I'd made, fixing up the property. Some nights I'd take long walks out into the forest. I'm far enough out in the country that on clear nights it looks like looking up at a sea of stars. I think about my parents the most during those walks. I grieve and remember in my own way. I wonder where their road went, if they were still traveling or if they reached their destination. I hope that their road takes them strange and beautiful places. When I walk at night, I look up for the North Star to keep from getting lost. Maybe they do the same. When it's full, I look up towards the moon. I wonder if my parents had a chance to visit, to search for hidden oceans. I like to think they did, that the moon has at least one Maria, the one I loved most. When we were growing up, Sean was closer to a brother than a friend. He must have spent more time at my house than his own. My parents knew Sean's home life wasn't exactly, it wasn't in danger of being adapted into a Hallmark movie, that's for sure. So they let him spend the night any time he needed to, or come over for dinner whenever he wanted, even spend the weekends. But my parents didn't realize just how terrible Sean's home was. Not until it was too late to help him. They didn't know how ugly his world was because I never told them, and I'll carry the weight of that omission with me for the rest of my life. Sean's family moved in down the street from mine when he and I were both 10 years old. By 11, we were so close you could hit one of us and the other would feel it. Lord knows, it seemed like I could feel it whenever Sean turned up to school with fresh bruises on his arms, his legs, his ribs. You see, Sean's dad had the low cunning of all cruel things. He knew how to hide, to blend, deflect. I was the only one Sean told how bad it was, but he made me promise to never tell. I think he was worried if people knew, someone would come and take him away, leaving his mom living with a monster and no one to protect her. I know now I should have said something. Should have told someone, but we were 11. And I loved him like a brother, and a promise back then felt so heavy and solemn. Sean spent his 20th birthday at my house. By then, my parents knew his family wasn't going to celebrate anything. So my mom made a cake, and my dad picked up pizza, and the four of us had one of the best days I can remember. See, Sean and I had an unusual obsession. Old monster movies, especially the black and white Hammer horror pictures.